Hello and welcome to The Ring, Euronews' weekly debate show broadcasting from the European Parliament here in Brussels. I'm Stefan Grobe. On The Ring, elected members of the European Parliament go face to face on some of the biggest issues facing the EU. Today, we're going to talk about the situation that weighs on more and more people in Europe, the housing crisis.
Europe's housing crisis is no longer looming. It's already squeezing those least able to afford it, renters and low-income households. Over the past decade, prices have surged while wages have stagnated, leaving millions struggling to afford basic housing. The pressure is especially intense in southern Europe, where rising rents, over-tourism and short-term rentals in cities have pushed locals out, fueling protests and political backlash. At the same time, there is a lack of infrastructure. Countries like Germany and the Netherlands are missing construction targets and deadlines, while waiting lists for social housing keep growing. The European Union is pushing for more investment and simpler rules to boost affordable housing supply, but governments remain divided on how far to go. The crisis is no longer just about housing. It is becoming a test of Europe's economic model and social stability. So who should pay to fix it? And how?
A lot to unpack here for our contenders, and here they are.
Dirk Gotink, a Dutch MEP from the centre-right European People's Party. He serves in the Committee on Economic and Monetary Affairs and is the Vice Chair of the European Parliament's Special Committee on the Housing Crisis in the EU. Regarding the EPP-led housing report recently adopted by the European Parliament, he said, "The EPP group wants more affordable homes built faster. We need simpler EU rules to cut red tape, speed up permits, and treat housing with the same urgency as defense projects." Maria Ohisalo, a Finnish MEP from the Greens European Free Alliance group. She previously served as Finland's Minister of Environment, managing policy on construction and housing. As an MEP, she's a member of the Special Committee on the Housing Crisis. Critical of the centre-right-backed housing report recently adopted by the European Parliament, she said, "In this report, housing is not considered primarily as a human right and as a cornerstone of dignity, but as a tool that can be used for speculation."
So let me welcome to The Ring Dirk Gotink and Maria Ohisalo. Great to have you here. Good to see you.
Thanks for the invitation.
I think the core question right now is, why are housing costs rising faster than wages almost everywhere?
One of the key questions is the speculation, financialization of housing market, that homes are not considered primarily as human rights, but as asset classes for big hedge funds, companies, private investors. And then just saying that we should build and get more investors to the market, this will not solve the problem. We need more affordable housing and available housing for everybody.
But somebody has to build them, right?
Exactly, and this kind of state-sponsored sort of subsidies will only drive up more the prices. We want to fix the problem in the market because building materials are getting very expensive, which is one of the reasons why housing prices go up. But also governments try things like rent controls and all kinds of other demand-stimulating measures that also drive up prices, because what happens if you can get more money from the bank? That is, that the sellers of houses will start increasing their prices. And this is not financial speculators. These are citizens who have paid their entire lives to buy one or maybe a second house, and then you treat them as if they're criminals and if they're not allowed to sell their
I did not say that only public investment will solve the problem, but we have no experience of any country in the world that could have solved the housing crisis by only building more private housing. No, we need a mixed model. And also tackling the short-term rentals, which was also in the insert. This is a key question, not only in the southern Europe, but also back home, up north in Rovaniemi, Lapland. This is a place where students can afford to live in the city center anymore because it's packed of short-term rental homes.
Well, homes are being built as we speak, not only at the places where we need them most. Why is that so?
Well, the problem with Europe is that there's no one-size-fits-all. That's why we cannot have one single policy on housing, and we don't want that. Because local authorities like mayors and municipalities, but also regional authorities, they need to be on the front line of solving the housing crisis. In Europe, we can help them. We can help them with things like what I said, making sure that the market for building materials works, changing state aid rules, because indeed we need a mixed approach of public and private investment, so that we can also invest in middle class affordable housing. Because your introduction said it was mostly the lower salaries that had problems, lower income groups, but in fact it has become a generalized middle income crisis in Europe.
The problem is that we also have a lot of vacant homes around Europe, especially the ones that are used for speculative reasons. And this is where the governments can step in. EU can actually be there to inform the governments to maybe introduce vacancy taxes, maybe introduce different taxes for speed up sellings, so that you should maybe maintain the home for 2 years or 3 years and then after that sell it. Then one problem is also that when we then state-subsidize affordable housing, after 20, 30 years, these homes are actually sold into the market. And this is also a huge problem, so that when state is subsidizing something, they should maintain affordable and they should maintain state subsidized.
The housing crisis has been a long time coming. We know this for years, and it has only gotten worse. Why hasn't been done anything?
Well, because the challenge is also very big. Demographic change in Europe is very large. The influx of also people from around the world is significant, especially in certain countries. But again, there is no single solution to the problem. What we need is that people are not criminalized for investing in a home. And often in many places, their homes are their pensions. Because in countries like Finland and the Netherlands, pensions are organized via your income at your employer. But many people in other parts of Europe, actually they buy a house in order to secure income after they retire, which means that we need to respect and protect those properties as well, because this is very important for citizens around Europe. So my approach would be, find a balanced approach. See where Europe can help. Get out of the way of construction, for example, because there's a lot of rules around building a house, and everything that has to do with a house is regulated by Europe. And in the Netherlands, for example, we are going slower than we could because of environmental, often. And it's not because I'm against the environment. No, it's because I want to build houses.
I guess there's more red tape than just environmental, right?
But to be honest, in the report that we were writing in the European Parliament on housing crisis, EPP was willing to cut Birds and Habitats Directive, nature restoration legislation, energy efficiency legislation, very important tools to tackle the climate crisis, the biodiversity crisis at the same time when we need to tackle the housing crisis. So this is really a problem that we are backing in these big ecological crises at the same time. Only by saying that we need more simplification and we need more cutting the red tape, this will not solve. Building faster and low-quality homes will not solve the problems of climate change, altering our ways of living, summers becoming hotter and hotter, floods affecting our housing also. We need to tackle all the crises at the same time.
What about companies like Airbnb? How do they distort the market? And we've seen big cities like Amsterdam, Barcelona, restricting this.
Yes. No, they can have a huge impact in the big tourist destinations. My colleague mentioned Lapland, but also Amsterdam, or go around any big city in the Mediterranean. The issue is that some colleagues of mine want to go for the headline and say Europe needs to solve the problem, but there's nothing mayors and local authorities cannot do at the moment to solve the problem. Amsterdam has the strictest rules on short-term rentals in all of Europe. So be careful with asking for Europe to solve a problem which everyone actually already can do on their own.
Maria.
But this is something that we are now waiting eagerly from the Commission, that they would give a proposal on short-term rentals again. There was one done last term, but it was not enough. And I'm afraid that the regular people are not put into the center of the legislation, that we're not looking at the affordability, but we're only looking at touristification. And of course, the Greens will not ban the whole Airbnb and short-term rentals in general, but we want to make the local authorities able to use all the tools in their hands. I bet there are still ways that EU can also instruct, let's say, on the times, how long the places can be on Airbnb or other short-term rentals schemes. We need open registries of all the actors in the sector, and we need to really think whether in very, very affected areas we should maybe think about the bans, because there are these from Lisbon to Rovaniemi.
But this should absolutely not be done from a European level. These are local and national decisions, and you don't need Europe to solve a national problem, and that's what we're doing.
But then also Europe should not say that you should not use all the tools that you have on your hands, like in some cases.
All right. Well, let me stop you here as we're just getting warmed up. Now it's time for our viewers to get a real flavor of the European Parliament chamber, where members ask each other questions. And sometimes it can get heated. That means it's time for you to challenge each other directly, just as you do in the hemicycle behind us. So let's get started, and I start with Maria.
All right. As was mentioned, climate crisis is one of the biggest crises we are facing as humankind. And good ways to cut emissions in housing are making renovations accessible for everybody all over Europe and boost energy efficiency. In the negotiations, as I already mentioned, anyhow, EPP wanted to dismantle quite a lot of these tools, and you were not willing to have, for example, dedicated funding for renovations in the EU level to really make housing affordable and sustainable at the same time. So why is this?
Well, to be fair, at the moment from, for example, the Recovery Fund money and also from the current MFF, which has opened up, for example, the cohesion funds for investments in housing, there is never been more European money going into housing investments than at the moment. And that is because the EPP has been pushing this agenda for a long time. Secondly, whenever we invest, we don't do that with a blank check. Of course, there are standards, and I fully agree, and that's why we put that also in the report, that we need energy-efficient housing. There's no point in giving someone a house which then costs a lot in income to heat, for example. So we need energy efficiency. In fact, in Europe, we have the highest building standards in the world. People forget that. But in all these rules that we have made and the standards we have built, there are also some that we don't need and that are excessive. For example, minimum heating temperatures for corridors where nobody comes in winter. Some things we should be able to look at pragmatically and not only dogmatically and say, oh, if you touch a nature-related law, then you're against the environment or climate change. That's not true. What we want is to fix some of the complexity that is in the legislation. And everyone tells us, everyone, the builders, the investors, everyone tells us, please make it easier to invest, make it easier to build, and then the houses will come.
No one is against cutting the unnecessary red tape, but then when it really comes to just building faster, just building lower quality, it will not solve the biggest crisis we have on our hands.
Okay, short comment, but now your question to Maria.
Well, my question would be about this approach. What we urgently need is a simplification package from the Commission about the rules and laws that have to do with building houses or the environment around the houses. So the soil, the air quality, the water quality, everything that has to do there, and even Nature 2000, yes, the Habitat Directive. These are things where you can make targeted simplifications in order to solve a basic problem that has in fact to do with the dignity of people, and that is building houses, making sure that everyone has a house and a roof over their head. And why can you not simply talk with us on that issue?
If I'm pragmatically giving you the answer from this house, the reality here is that EPP quite often tends to choose the cooperation with the far-right parties in this House, not the so-called von der Leyen majority with EPP, SD, Renew and the Greens, which was very good on the previous mandate. And now suddenly EPP has this huge wave of simplification and everything just has to deal with cutting the red tape and so on. And this really has led to problems if in this House, if Commission gives something here and suddenly EPP here chooses the cooperation with far-right, then we will see dismantling of all these really important legislation. Not only fixes here and there, but it will dismantle the big picture of our nature protection, climate actions here.
So what we see is that my colleague moves away from solving the problem for people and starts talking about the political games here in the European Parliament. That is a big mistake, big mistake.
Are you going away?
What we should put at the center is trying to solve the problem. In the EPP group, many of my colleagues voted in favor of all the laws that you mentioned. They are not in favor of dismantling all of it. So stop making that kind of narrative basically mainstream, because it is not. You will find that we voted also in favor of the climate targets. We voted for a lot of the important things that you're referring to. So don't tell us that we want to dismantle it. What we want, and also looking at the outside world, I mean, we are not living in a bubble. Our global competition is killing our economy. Yes, it is affecting how much money we have, for example, to invest in housing. We need to get our act together. This is a very disruptive period of history for us. Of course, we have climate change, but we're also fighting for economic survival in the world.
Yes, and regarding this, if we want to see housing crisis as a real European crisis, then everybody should be involved as actors. It should be the European Union level, the institutions, EIB. It should be the member states, national governments and the municipalities. And maybe we should talk about the deficit rules. And what if you said that housing should be dealt together in a similar way than defense is dealt in the European Union level? So would you then agree that we would exclude housing actions from the deficit rules as we've done for the defense questions?
No, on those fiscal issues, I even think that on defense it is not helpful, because the markets, they don't care if Brussels give exceptions or they think, oh no, you can make more deficits. The markets look at your ability to pay back.
But the member states are interested in that, and now many countries are not building enough affordable housing.
Thank you both so far. I think we've heard your arguments very clear. Thank you very much. Now it's time to bring in a new voice into this debate. And here I would like to bring in French Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu. In January, during a press conference on France's national plan to address the housing crisis, he said this: "I have no doubt that we will be closely watched for our collective ability to succeed and deliver 2 million homes by 2030. Housing is one of the major emergencies in the country." Dirk, your comment. Building 2 million homes, is this the ultimate solution to this?
It's a good election slogan.
It's a good election slogan
for the French elections. Yeah. But honestly, start with one, and then do another one, and then do another one.
Yeah. Maria.
Putting long-term targets. I mean, it's interesting for the communication, but nobody can live in a promise.
Okay.
Yes?
Is that realistic?
Well, actually, in the introduction, there was already a mention about some countries. Germany, for example, a big EU country that has no proper targets. This is a problem. If we don't see where we're heading, obviously we're not doing enough efforts to reach it.
Yeah. Can the EU meet climate goals without worsening the housing crisis?
Definitely. If we decide to do so, we have proper EU legislation on cutting emissions, the 2040 target by cutting 90% of our emissions. This is a very good example to show to the rest of the world that EU is still working, even though there's a lot of discussions that we should maybe back on our climate targets. But at the same time, taking all the tools that we have on our hands, as I mentioned, from the EU level to national governments to municipalities, and taking the best practices into use. Even though if it's not European Union or Parliament Commission that can solve the crisis by itself, let's say there's a good practice on housing first, for example. This has been a very functional tool in cutting down the numbers of homelessness. Finland has been the country that actually was nearly reaching the goal of eradicating all homelessness in our country.
I mean, the question is always who pays for upgrades, right? Does that push rents even higher?
It's a good question, and I agree that the approach in Finland has been very interesting and successful, but Finland is also one of the richest countries in the world. We cannot replicate what Finland has done in all other member states. I want
to talk about young people after the break. We'll be back with more. Don't go away. Welcome back to The Ring, Euronews' weekly debate show. I'm Stefan Grob, and I'm joined by Dirk Gotink from the European People's Party from the Netherlands and Maria Ohisalo from the Greens from Finland. In this edition, our guests are debating Europe's housing crisis, and I'd like to bring in some numbers from Eurostat. Roughly 1/3, 30% of income is now spent on housing in southern Europe. Around 80% of low-income households in Greece are overburdened by housing costs. Then between 65 and 70% of young adults in Italy still live with their parents. 26 years is the average age Europeans leave home, but 30 plus in southern Europe. I promise we talk about young people. They are under pressure for various reasons here. What do you tell them when they say, I can't find an apartment, I have to stay with my parents, I want to move on? What do you tell them?
I tell them that in the European Union level and also in the member states, the Greens are fighting in order to get the homes more affordable for everybody. If it's not the first-time buyers, not too many people can afford to buy their own homes before they are 30 or something more, but at least to be able to rent. And right now, the problems are in the speculation, in the market where big companies are taking over. It's not often the people who might own even a couple of or even more homes. That's not the problem, the small-scale investors, but the big investors. The lack of willingness in the European Union level to tackle the short-term rentals crisis we have in many countries, and the lack of willingness to really invest in public, public affordable housing in all the member states and take the best practices into use. So we're working on this.
What about this lack of willingness that she is mentioning?
Well, I think the housing crisis is in the top 3 political topics in every member state in Europe. So there's not a single politician that is not aware that this is one of the main challenges of the future. And especially if we want to give a bit of hope and perspective to the young generation. In the Netherlands, you need to have, if you want to buy, you need to have 90,000 euros in cash, minimum, to be able to get on the buying market. Which is crazy. Normally, a student probably has more debt coming out of university than they have cash on their bank account. So it's not realistic, and it's unfair because parents, rich parents of children that get on the market will get an advantage over the ones that have less financial abilities.
One problem is homelessness. And what we're seeing that homelessness is on the rise in Europe, even in some of the richest countries. And that the people who are affected by this, sometimes they have jobs, but they just cannot afford an apartment. How are we going to tackle this?
It has a lot to do with accessibility of areas with more affordable housing, because one of the issues we see everywhere is that in the capital of your country, it's almost impossible to buy or rent anymore. So you see younger families, for example, going out into the periphery cities. And if these cities are not well connected with train or road connections, then obviously it is much more difficult.
Is housing a social good or a market commodity?
Both.
It should be a human right. And
we cannot live in human rights.
While tackling homelessness, housing first principle is the key to solve it. So you first give the home to a person. That is where, if you can also invest into services to this person who has probably lived in the streets for years, then this person can maintain the home and will not be kicked out to the streets again. If we just wait for the person first to get rid of their substance abuse problems or get a job from the street, this will not happen. So give the home first, and this will solve the whole problem. Okay,
now we're going to move on, and it's time for our fifth and final round. We want to do something different here. I'm going to ask you a set of questions, and you can only answer with a yes or no, if that's okay. Can the EU meaningfully act when housing policy is mostly national or local?
Yes.
Dirk? Yes?
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Should Brussels take a stronger coordinating or funding role?
Yes.
Yes.
Funding, yes. Coordinating, no.
No. Should governments impose strict rent controls to limit price increase?
Show me where it worked.
We have different opinions about this in our political group here in the Parliament. Personally, I would say no.
No. Should foreign investors face limits or bans on buying residential property?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, we can talk about it.
Okay, I take this as a yes. Should zoning laws be relaxed to allow denser construction in urban areas?
Yes.
It depends on the set of other legislation also when it comes to nature, climate and so on. So
rather no?
Rather no.
Okay. Should vacant properties be taxed or expropriated to bring them onto the market?
Yes.
In highly populated urban areas, if you leave properties vacant for too long, I would say personally, yes, you need to be able to nudge the property back onto the market. So the authorities should
ask what's going on here. And
we already have that possibility in the Netherlands in some places, okay. and I think you can think about that. But it's not Europe deciding that.
Yeah.
It's the national authority.
Of course. Should the EU allow more public spending and debt to build social housing?
Well, that is what's being done now in a limited way. So that's a yes.
Yes.
Yes. Should home ownership be actively promoted, or should policy accept a long-term shift towards renting?
We need both.
Home ownership is the basis for people's stability in life, and yes, it should be promoted.
Good. All right, last question. Have you agreed with anything you've heard from your opponent today?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the housing first. In Finland, it's a very successful approach.
Okay.
And I agree that a lot of the problems people are faced with cannot be solved if someone is on the streets and they need simply a roof over their heads.
Okay.
I really like the fact that you want to see defense and housing crisis on the same level. I really want to see this switch in the narrative in the whole European Union level.
And that final answer brings us to the end of this edition of The Ring. Thanks to our audience at home. If you like, you can continue the conversation by sending us your comments to thering@euronews.com. That's it for today. I'm Stefan Grobe. Take care and see you soon on Euronews.